Woo!
All right, so very nice to meet all you guys. Yeah, I'm a director of electronic music here at Princeton. That's my official title. And a composer, instrument designer, improviser, multi-person. I do a bunch of different things. Yeah, and I'm going to do a relatively casual talk here. So if there are questions along the way, I'm very interested in just kind of guiding things towards people's interests and talking a little more towards, if something is, if there's something about my work that you're, oh, well, tell us more about that, then I'm very happy to, just switch off and start talking about that. So feel free to chat along and, maybe Shelby will watch the chat and let me know what kind of questions people have. So, okay, yeah. So maybe I'll start a little introduction of my background. I came from kind of, a rock and jazz background originally, and playing guitar and bass. I played electronics from a relatively early age, which in the 90s, as a high schooler, that wasn't super common, but I had like a little sampler and played live with hardware samplers for a long time before like computers could really do that. So in college, I studied composition in undergrad, and then I went to grad school at Columbia, and then got the job here at Princeton after that. So all my training is in music composition, but I also do a lot of things like kind of along the electrical engineering and computer programming side of things, even though I'm not officially formally trained at all in any of that stuff. So I'm just by the seat of my pants kind of faking it. But I've gotten relatively good at it, which is fun. So mostly that kind of side of my work is really guided by what I want to do artistically and what I'm interested in trying to make happen for my art, that I figure out, oh, I need to learn this thing in order to have the power to do that, because I'd rather, as much as possible, I'd rather figure out how to do stuff for myself than have to rely on others to always do this sort of technical side of work for me. So, I got to grad school not really knowing how to write programs and things like that. And I learned it when I was 21, I started learning that stuff. So, but that's kind of been a big part of my work ever since then. Maybe I'll show a little bit of my work. I wonder what the best way to do it, if sharing screen means the audio quality be kind of okay or bad. I don't know. We'll see. I could share it. I could also kind of guide you guys through my website, which I updated recently, so it's not too crusty. What do you guys think works best on your side?
I think if you want to share your screen, and when you're at the sharing settings and click optimize for computer sound audio, or whatever it is.
Yep, I got it on.
I think that's great.
Okay, cool. All right, so here's me. You guys can see? Yes? Okay, now I can't see you, so.
We can see.
Okay, I see, yes. Okay, great. So, yeah. So let's see, I'll talk a little bit about, yeah, exactly. This is me when I looked a little more buttoned up. This is like, if you've ever seen a video of Willie Nelson from the 60s. He's like clean shaven with short hair. It's like, what? So, but I'm going full old school Willie Nelson these days. So maybe I'll talk about a few of my pieces to kind of discuss the things that have been interesting me lately. And if you guys, as you guys have questions about them, maybe we can talk about those things. How about, let's start with, let's start with this one. This is something I've been kind of interested in for a while, is the concept of animated notation. And if you're interested in, so if you are interested in the work that's been done in that field of, inventing notation that the performers play by watching an animation rather than by reading a score, my friend Ryan Ross Smith made his doctoral dissertation was on animated notation. And for his doctoral dissertation, he made a website as like a thing that goes along with it, which is amazing. So he basically put together this great resource of like, oh, you want to see some animated notation works? Well, here's like pieces for all sorts of different ensembles, and you can be like, oh, what are animated notation pieces for string quartet? And he's got links to all these pieces. You can look it up by composer. It's amazing. So this is a fantastic resource if you're interested in this kind of thing. But I find this idea, not all my work, not that much of my work does this, but I think this was a successful piece where I was trying to do it. Where basically you get, when you're not using traditional standard notation, you open up a lot of possibilities for other ways to express things. But you also lose a lot of power of what traditional notation gives you. So there's certain things that become a lot harder to express, or you have to invent your own ways to express. And there's certain things that can be a lot easier to express that are done relatively poorly by standard notation, right? So I was kind of interested in exploring those things. This is a piece that was played by Plork. It's been played a lot of times since by different groups. The conductor runs the notation system, so it's usually me running it. And the notation is actually improvised. So I set it up as like it's actually an in-browser program, so you can run the program if you want to and try it. If you look on my website, if you look at the score, it's got a link to the website that I'm running in order to do it. But I've got little keystrokes to add different elements and change things. So I'm just kind of improvising that on the fly, and then all the musicians are watching this score projected on a screen, and the audience is watching it as well. So the audience can really kind of see, they don't know the rules, but they learn them based on watching the piece. So if I play this, will you hear it? Let me just jump to a section to see if the sound's coming through. Can you hear? Great, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna play a little bit of this. I'll play it, start at the beginning. I'll maybe jump to somewhere in the middle at some point, and then I'll jump to the end. to skip ahead a little bit so you can kind of see development. I'll maybe skip ahead to another moment. I'll go a little further. Let's see. This one's kind of fun. Another little fast forward. Here's the very end, just to see how it is. All right. So let me just see. Now I can see your chat. So yeah. So I guess what do people think about this? Are there any particular thoughts or questions about what's going on or how I did it? Thanks for the compliments. So if you're curious about sort of what exactly all the rules are, the score is right here that you can see on my website. So each person has one instrument, one pitched instrument, one what I call homogeneous unpitched instrument, and one heterogeneous unpitched instrument. So basically, we chose in this performance to have the homogeneous unpitched instruments be woodblocks. So the idea is everybody has one sound that makes an unpitched sound that sounds like everyone else's, kind of. And then everybody has one kind of percussion unpitched sound, which they choose and they bring to the thing, and it can be whatever. And it should be different from everyone else's. You could hear, like, I think Jason's was a little bowed cymbal. I think Alyssa was doing like a foot stomp or something. I don't know. People had their own little thing. So, and then each person has their own pitched instrument. Some people play, you can play, there's a little max patch, so you can play an electronic instrument that I made for it if you want, or you can just play an acoustic instrument, whatever you feel like. But I feel like one thing I think is relatively successful about this is I do think that the rules become somewhat clear as it goes along, and I try to introduce things one by one so that the audience can kind of say, oh, that's interesting, a new thing. There's some things that the audience probably wouldn't necessarily be able to understand, but each line is a different, when I do a line of a different color, that's a different pitch collection. So you can see kind of the planets are the different players, and each person has a set of different notes they can do. So if you play an acoustic instrument, you just pick whichever ring fits in your range best of your instrument. And then you have different chords for the colors. And you really just have different notes. Like each person has one note, but then the extra notes here are if moons happen. So then those are the other notes that you can play, right? So it ends up with really slow harmonic material, right? I can't change these lines very quickly, or the players wouldn't be able to adjust very fast. So, and it's not the most easy thing to perceive. You're like, okay, wait, blue, what's that? So I think I ended up moving towards, I tended towards a pretty slow harmonic development. I think this notation that I chose and the way that I did it, it's very easy to do rhythmic complexity, and very complex rhythmic stuff can be done very easily with the players not having to think very hard. And, that was kind of amazing. I think it turns out to be, at least the way I implemented this, relatively poor for, complex pitch things. There's other things I could have done. I could have maybe had like each planet have like a number inside it that's like the note that you play, and I could change those numbers. Something like that could work. I don't know. I tried to think of various ways I could make the notation a little more rich, and I decided to focus on rhythmic differences and have kind of a relatively static harmonic field, which is somewhat common for my music. I do a lot of pieces that have sort of like harmonic areas that move every like minute or two.
Jeff, this seems like it really hits. This is Adam, by the way. It seems like it really hits a sweet spot.
Yeah, I know your voice.
I know. Well, just just making sure because there's so many boxes.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, for other people.
It seems like it really hits a sweet spot of in the moment perception, and yet, as you say, builds it to a lot of complexity. Like as I was watching it, I felt like I could be a performer perceiving how the differences would mean certain things. Like once I heard what the the little slashes rather than the dots on the line, once I heard that what that was, I thought, okay, if I saw that, I would be able to switch that right now. And with any kind of graphic notation, and now this idea of animated notation, there's always this element or this trick of like it can be very difficult. Or with a lot of times when we do readings with student composers, they have not only graphic notation but lots of instructions, like a score, lots of instructions, and we're like, cool, we need to sit here for 20 minutes reading your instructions right now, and then we'll make some sound. And they've been sort of in their studio like, I'm going to do all this cool stuff with my piece, and we're like, we cannot perceive enough of the elements of this piece to give you a good sense of it right off the bat. And I was like really struck watching this by how quickly I got what I would be doing if I was a performer. And that's not an easy like bullseye to hit. I mean, was there experimentation in that?
A lot. So this is one of the advantages of leading Plurk, is that I have a little built-in test bed. So it's nice to have an ensemble where the idea is that we're making new pieces and we're making new technological things and we're just building new stuff, and we don't have any repertoire, so we have to make up new stuff. So, well, we could have repertoire now that it's been around 15 years, but I like pretending there's none. So, so that we can always just make up new stuff. But because of that, the whole process is like prototyping. So this one really got iterated over a whole semester. Every couple of weeks I'd bring in a new version of the code and I'd be like, yeah, how does this work? And the players would be like, okay, but I can't do that. That's too fast. And you need to give me preparation for this. And I'm like, well, how am I going to, maybe I can make them fade in, things like that. So the workshopping was instrumental in making this work. I think like it would have been a different and not as good piece if I hadn't had the situation in which that kind of experimentation was easy. Yeah, for sure. And, it just required a lot of, anytime that you're inventing a new system or, not taking where you're not entering into a already agreed upon social contract, like standard notation is, you're really relying on feedback. So, your brain can't tell you everything that's going to work or not work. And, you got to listen to the players. So I listened a lot to players and changed. There's some things where the players still were not super happy about that I think are in the piece, but some things are aesthetic too. Like I really had to balance. They're like, oh, well, for instance, I had this I wanted a general character of dark to light, like, okay, there's bright timbres and dark timbres. And I was trying to figure out some way to do that with color. And originally I was like coloring the dots different, but the people found that hard because then they couldn't really see when their dot changed color. It got confusing somehow. I think it made it just difficult when it's moving and it's changing color and what's going on. So then I made the background change color, and that's why it's pink and blue, or like red and blue as for like bright and dark. Recently I always thought aesthetically it was kind of nice to be able to fade that, but the players always felt like it was just too subtle a change. Like even if it goes from being totally blue to totally red, if it does it over 30 seconds, they just kind of got used to it while it was happening and they're ignoring it because they're watching their thing. So I made it a sudden change in the recent versions of the piece, and it makes it a lot easier. People just go, oh, because it flips, So things like, but that was kind of an aesthetic thing where I was like, I don't know, and also there were a lot of different requests that people had where I was just like, I think that'll make it ugly, So, because I'm also thinking of it as a visual piece for the audience, so it's got those kind of back and forth pulls. So I don't know. Yeah, does that other questions about that kind of thing? I don't know.
Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah. The official hand raise. We're gonna.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
This is more of just like a comment than any kind of question. I've over the years, like the more and more I've dived into percussion music, like the complex stuff, the more and more I found it like really difficult, like to notate complex rhythmic things.
Polyrhythm. Yeah.
Yeah. This is so expansive. Like my mind is blown right now. Like thinking about all of the rhythmic possibilities.
That's the most fun thing about this notation, is that, like, you know, 7th graders can play like 11 against 13 accurately, because they're just watching it and like, dude,
Right.
oh, they don't care what the other person's doing, right? And it's actually, it's kind of amazing. I've been able to play it with relatively inexperienced musicians and get really complex rhythmic stuff going on. You know, it's that Guitar Hero kind of thing going on, but you know, but it's at an expense of a lot of other things, right? It restricts you in a way to this loop-based thing. It'd be very hard to have constantly new material coming the way that Guitar Hero does and still have it be, I think, as locked in. You can hear as whenever they change position, the people take a little while to adjust and find, oh, where is that pattern? So I think like constantly changing or having sort of more complex patterns than a simple equally spaced situation would be difficult. But I don't know. But yeah, that was what excited me about this concept, basically, was the potential for polyrhythm, especially since standard notation does it so poorly, right? That's one of the places where standard notation really you feel it's like Eurocentric origins of like, oh, you know, the only thing that exists are triplets. Oh, wait, there's something other than triplets. Okay, I guess we gotta get a new notation for that. Let's make the notes a different color. You know, it's like they like went crazy trying to figure out how to notate duple meter, because they, you know, back in the whatever 1600s. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll show another piece.
Yeah, I think Zach also had a question.
Oh yeah, Zach, that's right.
Yeah, I was just curious, like, how you created the video. I'm assuming that you had.
Yeah, good question.
And then the other part of the question is, like, now that you have this system, have you created other pieces based off of this? And like, what kind of variety can you get out of it? Or is it more or less like
this instrument is this piece or something?
Like,
yeah, great question. So, and I think those are both a lot of things I think about a lot while I'm doing this stuff. So the first one is, okay, I had this idea before I necessarily had a technological solution for it. I was like, it'd be cool to do something where it's kind of like the planet. I was watching some animation of the planets moving around, and I was like, oh, this would be cool. I wonder what it'd be like if it was sonified in a way. That was kind of the initial thing. And the first thing I tried was, at the time I was learning JavaScript, so I didn't know any JavaScript, and I was trying to learn it because I was going to be teaching a class where I was going to be using it as a teaching tool. So over the summer, I was like trying to crash course myself. So first, it was there's a language called P5.js, which is a port of processing, which is kind of like a visual programming language for artists. And somebody turned that into JavaScript. It's great. If you want to learn some programming, that's an amazing place to start. So I was trying to teach myself P5 JavaScript, and I made a little animation of the planets going around, and I was like, oh, I could do this as music. But then I very quickly discovered that actually that would be a really boring piece, because the planet ratios are so extreme. So like Mars, like or Mercury spinning around, and Pluto like would never play for 15 years, you know? So just, you know, the dynamic range of that is too long. So then I was like, okay, maybe I'll just make my own little rhythms for these things. And I started programming this thing mostly myself. This one, a lot of my technology stuff is done just entirely me. This one, I had a collaborator, because I was relatively new to JavaScript, and I got kind of to a place where I could do most of what I wanted, but then I was like, oh, it'd be really cool if I could do, for instance, I was trying to do collision detection on the moons. When the moons start hitting each other, you can't really play that as a player. So that was something where I was like, this looks cool, but there's no way people are watching their line. They're not watching their things. So there's no way they could represent when the moons collide. But I was like, but that should make a sound. So I decided that's like an electronic component of it, is the conductor's computer is plugged into the speakers, and when the moons crash, they make a little which is kind of fun. But I just could not find a relatively efficient, when I tried to do it, it was like just totally grinding the thing to a halt my intention. So I asked my friend, who was a computer game designer, who was also a student of mine, an amazing game designer. And I was like, how would you do this? And he was like, oh, let me look at it. And he wrote that code. And he wrote a little bit of, while he was at it, he did some other optimization. So this ended up as a collaboration with him. His name's Drew Wallace. Yeah, so, and then now I just kind of edit it as I need it. And now I've learned more JavaScript, so I feel much more confident when I go in there and hack it. But the other part of your question was?
Yeah, just like if you.
Oh, how much of this is this piece versus this system that could be more pieces? Yeah. So one thing is, as I said, it's improvised form. So there's materials, there's these, you have this many colors, you have 4 positions for the line, you have the ability to turn on and off any moon. You can also turn anything into the straight lines or the circle with the line through it for the different percussion sounds. I can change the ratio of the percussion sounds. This one can be, I can change the speeds that the things are going around and how many of them are placed on the circle. But beyond that, there's a very a limited set of things that I can do. I can change the background color, whatever. But I think of this as one piece, and I think you could very easily make multiple pieces out of it and have the rest. Even with all of those restrictions, you could just change what those symbols mean, right? And you could change, change what the range of the speeds. You could change all kinds of things and do different stuff with it. For me, I felt like I liked this as kind of its own thing, and it has its own set of possibilities within the world of that piece that I think all sound like that piece, as long as the instruments are the same and the rules are the same. So I haven't really pushed it further than that, and I think of it as being the system is the piece in this case. But I do a lot of other stuff where it's like I go back and forth. I do pieces where it's like, this is an instrument, but it's such a limited instrument that it basically will produce only one piece. And I'm happy doing that kind of thing. And other times I'm trying to make instruments or systems where it's like, this could go further. A lot of times I tend towards like the system is the piece situations where there's just where I want to get it, I make it too tweaky and specific to really, so that it gives too much identity for it to be multiple things in a way, the way that I see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think either way is a valid way to go about it. And the way I go about it, I tend to move on once I get something like this. And I'm like, okay, now what else am I going to do? So maybe I'll show another piece that's kind of like that, or along those lines where I built a system for this piece. And I think it's just this piece, but could be other pieces, I suppose. So this one here, I'll share screen. Let's see. Where is it? Hold on. Now I can't see my screen. There we go. Doot. Can you see me? Okay. How about Ghost Line? So this one is a piece for 4 players. It has different connotations now from when I made it in, I don't know, 2014. After we've spent a whole year on like Zoom and looking at each other over computers. At the time, I was just kind of intrigued by webcams and kind of thinking of what if I tried to make the webcam an instrument. So other people have done things along these lines. This was my take on it. So it's 4 players, they have webcams pointed at them. And the idea is all of the sound is created by the video. So the players cannot actually directly change sound. All they can do is change what the image is, and then the image is directly encoded into sound. It's doing that by basically, it's reading their webcam by like scanning the pixels line by line, and then just turning that directly into a waveform. So if the pixel's brighter, then the waveform goes up, and if it's darker, it goes down. And it's just doing it fast enough that it becomes a pitch, basically. So really, they can control the timbre of the sound by changing where their body is on the camera. And then they have other controls that you'll see get kind of added in that affect the way it sounds. But it's all being affected by changing the video in order to change the sound. So I'll do a little jumping around on this one too. jump a little bit. Show you the last couple minutes. Here, let's go see where this changes. Let's see. So yeah, you can kind of get an idea of it.
Jeff, we had 2 questions from the chat. First was Zachary.
Yep.
Oh, hi. I have a little minor question, and then also, I wondered what the little scan line was, and then I was also just trying to it was fun how you kept you have all these sort of harmonic things incorporated into the piece, like octaves and major chords and minor chords that slide in and out, recognizable things, but it's clearly not quantized to any tuning system. So
yeah. So the first question, kind of how's the scan line thing working? So I was thinking the very first idea for this piece that I had actually came from seeing another performance. I watched a piece by Alexander Jensenius, who teaches in Norway. He does electronic music stuff, and he made an ensemble that has muscle sensors on them. They use kind of the EEG equivalent, the things that you stick on your brain waves, but for your muscles. And he has the performers, and they just try as hard as they can to stand still and to not move. And then the idea is the more still they are, the more sound it makes. So in order to make sound, they have to freeze, and then every time they make sound, it's a rest, or every time they move, it's a rest. It was kind of an interesting idea, and I really liked that. And then that got me thinking of really micro motions, somehow sonifying micro motions. So my first idea was I want to make a piece where the performers are just sticking their eye up to the camera, and then every time they involuntarily blink is a big thing. I was thinking how to go the other way and just super amplify micro actions. So I started making this noise piece where it's basically you're just blinking, but every time you blink, it's that was what I was trying to do. And as I worked on that, I found something else that was more interesting, which is often the way that things go for me. I'm like, oh, here's a cool idea. I'm going to do this. And then I'm like, actually, that was kind of dumb, but this other thing is cool that I ended up with on the way. And that was this idea of just sort of scanning the image and then turning it into a waveform. So that's the scan line is just, when it starts, there's a static line, and that's the point at which the pixels are being read for brightness. And it's just translating that into the waveform that gets pushed into your ear with your headphones. And then at a certain point, they push a button. They each have little flight control joysticks, and they push a button on the joystick, and that makes the scan line start to move. And then they can change how fast the scan line moves. But basically, so you get this frequency, why do you end up with a note, right? And it's because there's a repetition of when the scan line's totally static, it's always jumping back to this part of the screen and then reading that way. So you get a periodic signal, right? So it's always doop, 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 doop. And it's going to be slightly different if you move your head around. It'll be changing each time, but But if you speed that up enough, it's a note, you know, the same way that all rhythms sped up are just notes. And then once the scan line starts moving, you still get that periodic signal, but you get more timbral shift over the course of it because it's like, right? The timbre changes while it goes. And I just found that really interesting when I started doing it, when I made that kind of by accident. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So then that provided the spark for the rest of the piece. But that means that you have control over the pitch. So because the scan line is making a periodic signal and that period is whatever rate you chose to scan it at, you can just make it play any note you want. And what's going to be different is the timbre based on the brightness and darkness of the way the image shape is shaped. So the players actually have total control over that. I've tried different ways in this piece. I feel like there's a bit of a failure in this piece in the performativity. I give the players a certain amount of control and other parts are not controlled. So it's a piece for 4 people, but I also have a 5th player, which is me as conductor in this. And unlike in Opposite Earth, I'm not really controlling the form. I'm just, there's a set form and it just goes through these 5 sections and I just cue the sections. But then the thing I'm doing is I'm actually forcing I'm stepping through a little timeline of 50 different chords. And those are being pushed over a network to their computer. So then they basically don't control pitch. They control everything else, but not pitch themselves. And I'm controlling their pitches externally. And that way I can set like, oh, now we're going to hit this nice major chord right here because I've actually pre-programmed all the chords. And the reason you're like, oh, but they don't sound quantized. They're not like equal tempered. They're sort of just, a lot of times when I'm doing stuff in computer and have a choice, I actually just do weird chords by ear where I set up a bunch of oscillators and I tune them and I'm like, that's cool. And I just store that. And it's not even necessarily theoretically designed as like, oh, well, I'm going to do a 7/8 and it's going to, you know, sometimes I do that, but a lot of times I'm like, yeah, you know, I want that, or I'll start there and I'll be like, let's do a 7th harmonic here. And then I'll be like, oh, it sounds kind of cool with this, whatever that is. And a lot of times it's not exactly just, it's like a little bit messy or something. So all of these chords are generated that way. I just set up 4 sawtooth waves and I just moved them until I liked it, where I was like, where should it go next? Yeah, that's cool. Save that, you know. So that's actually how it was composed. Go ahead.
Well, this actually may have addressed your question, Lawton.
What's Lawton's?
Yeah, a little bit. You're getting there. I was just curious, like more details about the synthesis technique, because I just loved the beginning when it was so like fragile and you know, sounded like it was kind of clipping. I don't know, it was just very organic and it almost kind of analog sounding. So like what's the synthesis technique?
100% as dumb as possible. Like it's really literal. It's really just reading those scanning that pixels. So it's like whatever the video is, that's the waveform. So I'm not even cheating or doing anything to it. Except for one thing, I am cheating a little bit. Don't tell anyone. It's a little too trebly when you do just the straight thing for my taste. So I'm actually doubling it with a sine wave that's controlled by the amplitude of the output signal at the fundamental frequencies, just so I could get a little bass on those bass notes because it sounded cooler. But it's relatively subtle. For the most part, all of the, you know, all those timbral synthesis changes, all of that, they come out of the video manipulation. So when it gets like really sizzly, that's like they have control over resolution. And if they put the resolution really high, then you get these high frequency kind of stuff. And especially if it's like noisy in the background. And when they drop the resolution lower, then it's like a low pass and it's kind of, you know, and that stuff just came naturally. I experimented with this was written in Jitter, which is like the video suite for Max MSP. And I just experimented with what were the possible things I could do with the video matrix, you know, just the image, and then see what they sounded like. It's a relatively simple max patch because it really is just reading. There's a peak tilde, it's called, PEEK tilde object in Max that lets you treat a video matrix as though it's audio. And I'm just controlling that, basically. Yeah, I liked, this is one of the pieces where I felt like I wanted to really be a little bit hardcore about like, except for as I mentioned, I cheat a little, but, you know, a little hardcore about the concept is like relatively pure, you know, it's just like, all they can do is change the video, and then whatever they do, whatever the sound is whatever they did to the video. But obviously they know what the video does to the sound. So the players in this piece have improvisatory power of, they know there's these 5 sections. Each section has kind of, these are the things you can do. You can change resolution in this one. And now you can move the scan line speed, and now you can change colors and stuff like that. But they get to play with each other. You know, they get to perform it as an improvisation thing within those things.
Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Shelby and I are wondering if we're going to see any Owen Lake before this
I should show some Owen Lake for
session
sure.
is over.
Yeah. So maybe I'll show some Owen Lake. Maybe it's only have a few more minutes, but just so you see a little bit more of my range of work. Let me just do a quick let's see here. So if you want to poke around my website, I'll point you quickly to a couple different kinds of things that represent some interesting stuff. If you're curious about like web art stuff, I also did this piece that's all basically music that happens in the browser in this 3D environment. So these are pieces for your web browser. Check it out with headphones on, and you get to click your mouse and move it around. And it's like these crazy 3D shapes. This is also a collaboration with Drew Wallace, that game programmer. So I do this kind of stuff. And then the other thing I wanted to show you, if you want to see if this interests you, I do a lot of instrument building, as I mentioned. So these are some of these instruments that I've made. Drumbox was designed for a SoSI in years past, where I made this thing and then wrote a piece for some of the SoSI percussionists to play it. And then So played it afterwards. And also Jason Truding did a recording of it for me with Eric too. But yeah, so this is a lot of my work is like ends up being building instruments and then writing music for those instruments. And that brings me a little bit to this guy. This is Owen Lake. This is another one of my projects, which I'm also, I have an alter ego as an electronic country musician. So here's Owen Lake. And yeah, the idea behind this, I'm really into country music. There's a lot of music that I like. I'm into a whole bunch of different things, but I've always been pretty interested in country music, and I like the genre conventions, and this classic country from the 60s and 70s, really, I dig it. So this was my way of being able to sing some country songs, but since I do electronic music, I made it electronic. Now I like that the idea of country and electronics is not as shocking, since Old Town Road and had brought it into the public consciousness a little bit, which is nice. But maybe I'll play like one of these tunes. Let's see. How about this one?
When death shall close these eyelids, and this heart shall cease to beat. And
oh wait, no, you know what I gotta do really quick? I just need to show some actual video of Owen Lake. That's a lot more fun. Oops. Lake.com. Here's my music video from my last album. That one's fun. Here we go.
I remember my childhood, my mother said, son.
You guys know this guy. There's Jason on the drums.
Prepare to meet Jesus when your work here is done. When I die, just remember my soul will live on. I'll be there to meet you and welcome you home. I'll meet you in heaven some wonderful day. When the dark stormy clouds of life rolls away. When of death comes and takes you away. Be ready to meet Jesus, be ready today. Don't put it off as time passes on. Be ready to meet Jesus, we'll welcome you home. I'll meet you in heaven.
Yeah. So you guys could check that out on your own, but thought I'd show a little bit of what we're like. Yeah, James Moore. You guys know James?
Yeah, he has. He's doing a piece at
Oh,
SoSI.
yeah.
So there's some participants playing one of his pieces.
Oh yeah, great. So okay. Any other thoughts, questions?
Thank you so much for being here, Jeff. Is there a way that people can reach you if they're curious to learn more about your stuff
for
or to
sure.
be in contact?
Yep. You can. Let's see. I think I have my email on my website. Let's see if it's true.
Oh, okay, great.
Maybe not. Contact. That's me, Jeff at Scattershot. So
Awesome.
you can email me right there. Yeah. And let me know if you got questions about these pieces or anything in general. Good luck writing your things, your SoSI pieces, and hope you have a good time with this. This is such a cool program that, I don't know, it's been really cool watching the amazing stuff people have done over the years through this. So,
well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, so much.
All right. See you guys later.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
I think for anyone in Medium ensembles, we'll jump on the daily link and catch up there. Thank you, Jeff. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Bye-bye.